And, of course, he, like all guests, appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And if you are watching us live on the YouTube stream, you can see Paul right there on the screen. Hey, Paul, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm great, Mike. How are you?
Doing good. And obviously tonight we got the Sixers taking on the Boston Celtics. So let's start there with who's in the game tonight and who is out for the Sixers, because they haven't played in a while. We had contact tracing. We've got some reports that Curry is back but not going to play tonight. So who do we know will be back tonight?
Well, no is a strong word. We're pretty sure that they're going to be at pretty much full strength. It looks like Mike Scott will be out, still dealing with his knee issue. Seth Curry, as you just mentioned, he will be out. He is cleared through the health and safety protocols, but his conditioning is not up to, he's got to play an NBA game. So you don't want to throw him in a situation where maybe he's not quite ready yet. So I think the Sixers are just being cautious, give him a little bit of time to ramp up his, his conditioning and all that. So, but encouraging that he is cleared through those protocols. Vincent Poirier still, I believe, has not cleared those, so he will be out as well. But for the most part, the Sixers are in pretty good shape. They look like they're going to be at the closest they've been to full strength, basically since Curry's positive test. So that's a good sign. So we'll see how things progress. Maybe Seth Curry will be available Friday, but he's not available tonight. And the Sixers are going to take on a kind of shorthanded Celtics team tonight. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah, obviously we know, and I want to get your opinion on this, Paul, what Curry means to this team. What have we learned over his absence about? I know it's hard because there's other guys been out, but what are we finding out about how important Curry is? Like we were talking the other day, it might be to the point where Curry is almost the third most important guy, or maybe even high. I don't know. Where do you find him on the level of importance?
Offensively, he might be the second most important player on this team right now. And listen, the guy is the highest active percentage three-point shooter in the entire NBA. That doesn't happen by accident. And then you add to it, and Doc Rivers told us this in training camp. He said, I am going to put the ball in Seth Curry's hands. I'm going to give him a bigger ball handling role. And we've seen that so far this year. And he's never – look, as much as what he played with Luka Doncic, who is a great player, it's different when you're playing with a guy like Joel Embiid because, when you're playing with Luka, he's got the ball. I mean, that's the way that goes. He dictates what's happening offensively. Now with Seth taking on a bigger ball handling role, he's kind of dictating it, and he's playing at it's very small sample size, obviously, but the best basketball of his career with a bigger responsibility, with that bigger role. Averaging more assists by far than he has in his career, and that's by and large a product of him playing with Joel Embiid. And I think that Joel Embiid has said he is more comfortable this year because he knows when he kicks the ball out, guys are going to make shots. And Seth Curry is an enormous part of that. So I would put him offensively as number 2 most important player right now.
What do you think about Furkan Korkmaz and his role, considering Isaiah Joe's making a little bit of noise and Furkan Korkmaz is coming back?
Yeah, so Doc Rivers has had nothing but great things to say about Furkan Korkmaz from the beginning, from when he first got here. He's been really high on Furkan. And he envisioned him having a really big role. He would always mention, it's Shake Milton, and obviously Shake has been his guy from the start, but he'd always also say, but I really like Furkan too, and I like Furkan as a playmaker off the bench, as like a secondary guy next to Shake off the bench. But to your point, bros, it gets a little bit more complicated because Tyrese Maxey has played well, because Isaiah Joe, and the little we've seen him, he's played well. So it definitely muddies things up, but it's a good problem to have because now you might have so many guys playing well and maybe not enough spots to go around. That's, as Doc Rivers already said, that's a great major problem to have. So I would expect, tonight he hasn't played in a couple weeks, so I'm assuming they're going to ease him into it. I wouldn't expect big minutes from him, but we'll see. We'll see how this progresses. Furkan's a guy who's instant offense. He can get hot in a hurry, and if his shot's going down, he's a really valuable player. So a very good problem, I would say, to have for Doc Rivers right now.
Paul Hudrick's our guest, and of course, you can follow him at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. Let me ask you, Paul, what you see the differences, if any, in a guy like Ben Simmons with and without Curry on the floor?
I think it's another thing where it's kind of like Joel Embiid in the sense that I do think it takes some pressure off of Ben Simmons when you have a Seth Curry on the floor because, again, just to go back to his ball handling role and how much bigger Doc envisioned that. And Ben Simmons, as much as he handles the ball, he is not Luka Doncic. So it's a different type of player. And for me, what I'd like to maybe see more of, and I think you saw a little bit of that when Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton were in the game with Ben Simmons is more of Ben Simmons playing like almost like that traditional 4 spot. And we saw Brett Brown do it at the end of last season where he had Shake Milton in the starting lineup. And I think when you have Seth Curry in the starting lineup, when you have him healthy and he can do more of that, you could put Ben Simmons more in off the ball roles. And I think that might be a good thing just to take some pressure off him. Because I think as much as Ben Simmons is struggling offensively, a lot of it is I think he puts pressure on himself. And I would like to maybe see him slide more into that off-ball role, have Seth Curry handle more of the ball handling duties, and then let's see if maybe that takes a little pressure off Ben. Maybe Ben gets a little more comfortable, and maybe this thing can work a little bit better.
How much does that Mike Scott injury play a role in that 4 position, though? Because some nights you look, Tobias logs a ton of minutes, and I do like Ben off the ball. I thought we saw him screen really well at times in pass, but, I think it sounds silly because it's like, oh, Mike Scott, but the minutes logged from some of these guys, you don't have a lot of options there is my point.
No, it's definitely a fair point to bring up, and there are many people who would argue that Mike Scott role, that backup power forward, was a spot that the Sixers should be looking to upgrade anyway. So when you factor in, Mike Scott missing the time again, he just came back from an injury to his other knee, and now his other knee is hurt. It does, because it does put a greater toll on Ben Simmons or Tobias Harris, because they are going to have to play with that second unit. Now, I will say that in a weird way, especially when Tobias Harris played with him, I thought it actually helped that second unit because they could go to a guy like Tobias and maybe get a bucket to hit an outside shot. So who is clearly, with all due respect to Mike Scott, much more reliable than Mike Scott, especially this season with how Tobias has played. So in a weird way, it might make the team kind of better on a nightly basis because you have Ben Simmons or Tobias Harris filling in for that role. But yeah, over the course of the long term, it does make you worry about minutes. And look, with everything going on, with COVID, with this contact tracing, with guys missing time, Doc Rivers' biggest concern wasn't necessarily about COVID. It's about overextending guys from a minutes perspective. So I think that just kind of goes to that point that, maybe on a nightly basis it improves that second unit, but at the same time, you're putting more of a toll on the bodies of Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris.
Yeah, and I know it's different because Doc and Brett are different, but you've been around the team and just have the feel of the league. Do you feel, obviously it's a different world we're living in, but that this regular season is being viewed differently by not only the Sixers, the NBA in general? Like, just get us to the playoffs. Hopefully the vaccine's around, and we will be treating that a lot differently than we're treating these games.
I do think you're seeing a little bit of that, and I think teams are bracing for that. And it's because, look, the NBA was already moving towards that anyway with all these guys sitting for low management, which I'm personally a proponent of. Preserve the great athletes and let's preserve their careers for as long as we can and not run them into the ground. I think that's a good thing. And I think the NBA was already trending towards that. So now with this season, Mike, like you pointed to, it being so weird and all the COVID things going on as far as positive tests, as far as guys with contact tracing and teams missing so many players, like asking an NBA coach to play 8 guys in a game. It's just, to me, that's lunacy. Like it's a terrible product. So no one benefits from that. Sure, we got one great game from Tyrese Maxey that was fun to watch in a weird way, but it wasn't a good basketball game. They got crushed because they were totally outmanned by the Nuggets. So I do think teams are going to treat this differently. And I think as the season goes on, there is going to be a feeling of, let's just get to the playoffs. Let's just get our guys to this thing in one piece. I mean, look, the Sixers have already essentially had 2 scares because they had Seth Curry get a positive test, and then they played against the guy who also apparently had a test. So it's a really complicated season, and the NBA is going to have to be careful. And there is going to be a vibe, I think, of let's just get to the playoffs and let's just get everyone to the playoffs safe and healthy.
Is there any plan for these postponed games?
Well, I don't think anything as of yet, but I think that's why the NBA was not scheduling a second half of the season, which I think was wise to do that. Give yourselves the room so that when these situations do occur, which we all knew they would, now you have that time. You have that a lot of time after the quote-unquote all-star break to kind of make a new schedule and put these games in there. So it definitely complicates things because obviously some teams are going to play more on the back end than they did in the front end. And is that going to be a weird competitive advantage for some teams playing less games in the second half? Who knows? That'll be remain to be seen. But yeah, I think the NBA was prepared. As much as you can prepare for these kind of scenarios, they were prepared in a sense that if games did get postponed, like we saw in the NFL when they had to push games back, or like we saw in Major League Baseball, that there were opportunities to make them up in the second half of the schedule, which is why it wasn't written. So as much as maybe they weren't prepared for some things, I think they were prepared for postponements, and that's why the second half of the schedule still has to be written.
Paul Hudrick's our guest, 97.3 ESPN.com, at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. And, of course, the Sixers take on Boston tonight. Do you feel like Doc Rivers, and I know, again, we go back to you asking the question about how deep they go, but almost might have to redefine the roles? I mean, because, man, this Maxey kid's better than I thought. Shake Milton, better than I thought. That he might have to, that their roles are evolving on the fly here.
Definitely. And that's as guys get better and things progress and guys are better than you expected, which again, a wonderful problem to have. Yeah, I think you do have to kind of make your adjustments. And I think that's when we talk about like the disadvantages and the advantages to doing things the way Brett did it and to the way Doc did it. I think that's to Doc's advantage in this regard, that when you have a guy who is playing well, you're like, you're not hesitating. You're not thinking like, well, Furkan Korkmaz is coming back, so maybe I need to make sure that I give Furkan Korkmaz back his role. Well, no. I mean, Furkan Korkmaz is going to get opportunities to play, but he's going to have to keep that role. And he's going to have to keep earning it because Tyrese Maxey and Isaiah Joe are breathing down these guys' necks. I think it's a good thing. It's a good problem. And yeah, I think, listen, when you come into his season, you can't, as good as I even thought Tyrese Maxey would be, you can't go into his season anticipating that a 20-year-old rookie is going to come in here and earn a big role and big minutes. But so far he has. And same with Isaiah Joe, a second-round pick, who 21-year-old rookie. You can't expect that guy to just be able to throw him into a fire and him respond. But both guys have. So I think you do have to change the way you view those guys. You have to change the way you view roles. And I think these guys are just going to push the competition, and they're going to push the veteran guys who have rotation spots. They're going to push them all season long.
With Ben Simmons struggling, I thought about this possibility, and it's a hypothetical, but if Danny Green goes to the bench, can Tobias Harris play the 3, or is one of the reasons why he's being so successful this year is because of his matchups with the 4? But I was thinking, if Toby goes to the 3, Ben slides in at the 4, maybe Tyrese or Shake starts. Is that something that would interest you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we're talking about like 3 and 4 with Tobias, I think the big thing is who he's guarding. And in that scenario you're talking about, yeah, I think Tobias would still be guarding 4s, and because Ben Simmons mostly guards perimeter players, depending on the matchup, obviously. But I do think that there is something there that you could put a Shake Milton in place of Danny Green, and maybe that takes even more pressure off Ben Simmons, because now he's got 2 guys in Seth and Shake Milton that can both handle the ball, that can both shoot. And in Shake's case, which we've seen this year, create his own offense, which would be huge. So I do think it's a thing for Doc where he's going to have to make a decision. Is Shake role kind of flourishing? Is Shake Milton kind of flourishing because of the role he's in, because he is that 6th man and he's provided that instant offense? Or is it maybe worth it to put him in that starting lineup and see if I can jumpstart the offense? Now, with that said, they are 7-0 with the original starting 5. So I don't think Doc is exactly eager to make any changes at this point, but that could be something that if we're halfway through this thing, 30, 40 games into this, and the offense at the starting lineup as it's constructed, if they are struggling offensively, yeah, I think that's a move that maybe you look at to bring Shake Milton into it, to maybe see if you can jumpstart that starting 5, at least offensively.
And how much, Paul, do you think that he's looking at that starting lineup and not panicking with Ben, because what he saw with the starting lineup, he liked?
Yeah, I think Doc was very clear, and he's been very clear all along, that he is not worried about Ben Simmons. I know a lot of Sixers fans are.
And why do the Sixers fans don't seem like they are as hard on Doc about saying that than they were the previous regime?
Because it's new, I would imagine, and because Doc has pressed a lot of good buttons so far, so they're not ready to jump. And look, I don't mean to keep harping on the idea, but like, and I get that the Sixers fans, like, their frustration is added because of the James Harden trade that wasn't. And so that adds, and you see James Harden, how well he plays, and that adds to the frustration when you see Ben Simmons still kind of struggling offensively. But look, I'm going to keep pointing to the fact that this guy last year, there was a 20-game stretch where he was unbelievable, scoring 20 points a game and averaging near a triple-double and dominating on the defensive end of the floor. That guy didn't disappear. He's 24 years old. I think the Sixers fans have to have like a little bit of faith in Doc Rivers and Sam Cassell to bring the best out of him, to get him right. And I think it's a partly too, it's Joel Embiid has changed for the better, has changed his style of play. And I think that has affected Ben Simmons as well. And Ben Simmons needs to adapt. I mean, flat out. He needs to adapt to the way Joel Embiid is playing, whether that's cutting more, whether that's being in that dunker spot, whatever it is. Ben Simmons needs to adapt to the way Joel Embiid is now playing. And I think Sixers fans, I know you hate this word, but like you need, it's because you had so much of it for so long, but you need to have a little bit of patience here. See if when this team is at full strength, and when Doc Rivers has had more time with Ben Simmons, see if he can get it right. See if he can get him back in the flow of that offense, more to the player we saw last year. Because listen, those limitations that Ben Simmons had, he had them last year. The ones that he has now, he had them last year, and he was performing at a high level. So, if we're 30, 40 games into this thing and it still looks like this, that to me is when you can start worrying.
I'm imagining you watched Nets Bucks the other night and wondering, when you watch those two, knowing what Brooklyn has, is Philly a notch below? Do you say, no, they're right there with that team?
It's tough. The way it looked that was, first of all, that was just a great game by both teams. I thought both teams looked great. The Bucks and the Nets looked unbelievable. Yeah, when you see down the stretch, James Harden just kind of scoring at will, it makes you think like, oh, man, like, yeah, what could have been? And I will say, too, I'm curious because James Harden historically hasn't been the greatest playoff performer. How will that, are those moments going to await him in the playoffs? Are those moments going to await him when Kyrie comes back? I don't know all that. But it's so early for me to know whether or not I think the Sixers are going to be in that conversation. There were 7 games early on that it looked like they could be, mainly because of their defense, because of how dominant they were defensively, and they were shooting the ball better. So are they in that conversation right now? I don't know. Could they be? Yeah, I think they could be if things progress the way they're supposed to, and Tobias Harris keeps playing like this, as Seth Curry returns and plays at the level he was playing at, Joel Embiid keeps playing at an MVP level, maybe Daryl Morey makes a move or two around the margins. Yeah, I think they could be in that conversation once the playoffs start.
His podcast is called Coming In for a Landing. Of course, you can hear him during Inside the Sixers here, Sixers and Boston. He's also got the best beard out of the three of us, by far. And, of course, Paul Hudrick on Twitter, at Paul Hudrick. He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Paul, we'll catch up with you soon.
Sounds good, Mike.
All right, there he goes, Paul Hudrick. And the guys tonight have all the coverage on 97.3 ESPN.com after Sixers and the Celtics.